organisational problem, sighed Mr. Weasley. Trouble is, about 100,000 wizards turn up at the World Cup, and of course we can't have a magical site that's big enough to accommodate them all. There are places muggles can't penetrate, but imagine trying to pack 100,000 wizards into Diagon Alley or Platform 9 3/4. So we had to find a nice deserted moor and set up as many anti-muggle precautions as possible. The whole ministry has been working on it for months. First, of course, we have to stagger the arrivals. People with cheaper tickets have to arrive 2 weeks beforehand. A limited number use muggle transport, but we can't have too many clogging up their buses and trains. Remember, wizards are coming from all over the world. Some apparate, of course, but we have to set up safe points for them to appear, well away from muggles. I believe there's a handy wood they're using as the apparition point. For those who don't want to apparate, or can't, we use portkeys. They're objects that are used to transport wizards from one spot to another at a pre-arranged time. You can do large groups at a time if you need to. There have been 200 portkeys placed at strategic points around Britain, and the nearest one to us is at the top of Stoats Head Hill, so that's where we're headed. Mr. Weasley pointed ahead of them, where a large black mass rose beyond the village of Ottery St. Catchpole. What sort of objects are portkeys? Said Harry curiously. Well, they can be anything, said Mr. Weasley. Unobtrusive things, obviously, so muggles don't go picking them up and playing with them. Stuff they just think is litter. They trudged down the dark, dank lane toward the village, the silence broken only by their footsteps. The sky lightened very slowly as they made their way through the village, its inky blackness diluting to deepest blue. With difficulty, owing to their bulky backpacks, the 9 of them crowded around the old boot held out by Amos Diggory. They all stood there in a tight circle as a chill breeze swept over the hilltop. Nobody spoke. It suddenly occurred to Harry how odd this would look if a muggle were to walk up here now. 9 people, 2 of them grown men, clutching this manky old boot in the semi-darkness, waiting. 3, muttered Mr. Weasley, one eye still on his watch. 2, 1. It happened immediately. Harry felt as though a hook just behind his navel had been suddenly jerked irresistibly forward. His feet left the ground. He could feel Ron and Hermione on either side of him, their shoulders banging into his. They were all speeding forward in a howl of wind and swirling colour. His forefinger was stuck to the boot as though he was pulling him magnetically onward, and then his feet slammed into the ground. Ron staggered into him, and he fell over. The portkey hit the ground near his head with a heavy thud. Harry looked up. Mr. Weasley, Mr. Diggory and Cedric were still standing, though looking very windswept. Everybody else was on the ground. 5:07 from Stoats Head Hill, said a voice.
This is Chapter 12, Part 1, The Triwizard Tournament.
Way, we've got a big party coming in from the Black Forest at 5:15. Hang on, I'll find your campsite. Weasley. He consulted his parchment list. About a quarter of a mile's walk over there. First field you come to. Site manager's called Mr. Roberts. Diggory, second field. Ask for Mr. Payne. Thanks, Basil, said Mr. Weasley, and he beckoned everyone to follow him. They set off across the deserted moor, unable to make man was standing in the doorway, looking out at the tent. Harry knew at a glance that this was the only real Malfoy. And Mr. Crouch had complied with the rule about Malcolm dressing so thoroughly that he could have passed for a bank manager. Harry doubted even Uncle Vernon would have spotted him for what he really was. "Pull up a bit of grass, Barty," said Ludo brightly, patting the ground beside him. "No, thank you, Ludo," said Crouch, and there was a bite of impatience in his voice. "I've been looking for you everywhere. The Bulgarians are insisting we add 12 seats to the top box." "Oh, that's what they're after," said Bagman. "I thought the chap was asking to borrow a pair of tweezers. Bit of a strong accent." "Mr. Crouch," said Percy breathlessly, sunk into a kind of half-bow that made him look like a hunchback. "Would you like a cup of tea?" "Oh," said Crouch, looking over at Percy in mild surprise. "Yes, thank you, Weatherby." Fred and George choked into their own cups. Percy, very pink around the ears, busied himself with the kettle. "Oh, and I've been wanting a word with you too, Arthur," said Mr. Crouch, his sharp eyes falling upon Mr. Weasley. "Ali Bashir's on the warpath. He wants a word with you about your embargo on flying carpets." Mr. Weasley heaved a deep sigh. "I sent him an owl about that just last week. If I've told him once, I've told him 100 times. Carpets are defined as a muggle